Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Looking at 1,000 people, I'm reminded of that ancient Chinese curse of be careful what you wish for. I'd like to, in particular, acknowledge the metaphorical mum and dad up the front, Rhonda and Bruce. It's an honour to share the stage with such committed and persistent and consistent advocates. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet and pay my respect to their elders, both past and present, and thank Auntie Pat for her welcome to country. I mean it when I say it is good to be back amongst friends. I do see a lot of familiar faces. The faces of people who at the end of 2007 and the beginning of 2008, when I started out as Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities and Children's Services. I see the faces of people who took the time to explain to me what life is really like for thousands of Australians living with a disability and their carers. And as Rhonda has said, it was an eye-opener. As you've heard me say in the past, I believe I have been around the traps of this country one way and the other with the union. I travel from end to end. I've been to shearing sheds and steel mills right to the mine at Beaconsfield. I'd met hard-working men and women and listened to their stories. I thought I'd seen treatments of second-class discrimination in this country. But of course I hadn't, as you know. I thought I knew my country, but of course I didn't. My 1,000 days of working with you directly were more than an education. It was a revelation, and can I also say that it was a privilege to work with all of you. I met a lot of great people and I saw a lot of not so great things. It is sobering to realise that so many tens of thousands of Australians live a second-class life in our nation, who live in a form of exile in their own country and who are disempowered. People unable to make choices and live an independent life because this country hasn't been able to fulfil the promise of what I think this country is capable of doing. It's been a privilege to be amongst you as you have started to unite into a disability movement determined to treat disability at its core as a civil right. And I certainly haven't forgotten what you've told me now I'm Assistant Treasurer. I haven't forgotten your stories. I haven't forgotten your campaign. I'm here in part to tell you that your cause is still my cause and that I'm still angry about the way which people with disability and carers get treated in this country. I'm still angry that young men and women with lifelong impairment still live in aged care homes. I'm still angry that ageing parents and carers looking after an adult child for as long as they can, hanging on almost haunted by that lonely midnight thought of who will care for their loved and beautiful adult child when they no longer can. And this country cannot look these parents in the face and guarantee that their adult child will receive the same sort of adequate love and care that these unique and special people deserve. I'm still angry that there are many Australians ready and able to work, but are shut out of the workforce because of the thoughtless discrimination of people who are not prepared to look beyond a person's impairment and not prepared to look at the whole person. I think, and I know that my cause, like yours, is to put an end to generations of misery and wasted potential, and as a result, make the whole country a better country. There is no reason in this country that schools, housing, jobs, friends and social acceptance should not be accessible to all. Now, I also bring you the news that I'm not alone in my views in Canberra. I'm part of a government that mightn't always get it right and it mightn't always move as fast as people legitimately expect it to. But our government knows that the status quo cannot remain. I do believe that in the first term, quite a bit was done in disability in a relatively short space of time. We've seen the leadership of Families Minister Jenny Macklin, and you'll hear later on the current steward, Senator Jan McLucas, who I know has long shared a passion and a determination, especially in those long years in opposition before the election of Labor at the end of 2007. She's had a passion to improve the lives of people with disability. But disability for too long has been a peripheral issue on the political charts of the day, and this is again something you've heard me say in the past. I do believe that Labor has made this a heartland issue, an issue which cannot go away. This is what Labor governments should do. I do know that we're spending $6.2 billion extra over 5 years on a national disability agreement. I do know that we've rolled out extra places to Australian disability enterprises, although more places are necessary. I do believe that we've made it easier for people on the DSP to look for a job. I know that we've boosted payments to the DSP, the carer payment and carer allowance recipients. I do know that we've established early intervention centres for children diagnosed with autism. I do know that over 7,000 children have received extra support, and I do know that more support is coming for other children with diagnosed impairments. We were one of the first Western countries to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Person with Disability. I know that we are fighting hard to make housing, not just commercial housing, but residential housing, more accessible through the National Dialogue on Universal Design and the more recently established Livable Housing Australia. Indeed, on Sunday, which wasn't something you read about in the paper, submerged by the wedding, but the long-running saga of the access to premises standards came into effect yesterday. We worked with the cinema industry to make a night out at the cinemas more enjoyable for the hearing and vision impaired. So a vision impaired parent can dissect the plot of Harry Potter, to the extent that any parent can, with their daughter after the show instead of just nodding along to her chattering obliquely. We've expanded the delivery of individual advocacy services and improved service coverage. But I think the most important thing in the first term is that we know that more needs to be done. We know that employment remains an area of substantial and rampant discrimination against people with impairment and indeed carers. As the Prime Minister said late last year, we do have to focus on getting people to be able to participate more in our economy and in this current budget. We do see that we have immense job opportunities in Australia. We have an official unemployment rate with a 4 in front of it, but we understand that people with disabilities are to some significant extent missing out on the long boom of the last 20 years in terms of jobs. I do believe that this government gets these matters. But I think that the best thing that we did in the first term was to ask the Productivity Commission to go away and say, surely there is a better way which we can organise support for people with disability and carers in this rich and powerful and clever nation. Now, the Productivity Commission's draft report was released in February. I know there was some trepidation amongst people going to the Productivity Commission. Would it give a dry economic report? They certainly haven't. And you'll be hearing from Patricia Scott, and her and her team have done a great job helping elevate the arguments. The Gillard government will consider the Commission's final report after it's delivered in July. It'll be handed to us in July. But what I do understand, and when you have no idea what pleasure it gives me, although it may give some discomfort to governments in the future, to see 1,000 of you gathered to talk about one idea. It became very clear to me in my time in the portfolio that unless there was one common organising idea which went to the lack of money and the lack of political power, then we could spend another generation chasing our tails. But you understand the importance of one idea which deals with political and economic power for people with disability. Any major change in the system, of course, needs to be sustainable and affordable. It's the best way that we can assure any new system will endure and meet the needs of people with disability in the future. In other words, the final report or the draft report will not in themselves be the end of the matter. A national disability insurance scheme is part of the live policy debate, but it is no done deal. In every government there are competing priorities, in every nation there are competing priorities. And there is still so much work to be done to educate others about the priority of disability reform. So the continued advocacy and the growth and strength of this gathering and others, and of the Alliance and people working together, is fundamental to the success of real change, of real civil rights reform for people with disability. Now, Plato lived a long time ago in Greece, but he did once say, although he said it in ancient Greek, let me translate. Truth is the beginning of every good to the gods and of every good to man. Truth is the beginning of every good to the gods and of every good to man. So let me tell you that the truth is the beginning of every good and disunity is the ending. You understand this by your presence here today. You know the issue and you can see a solution that will deliver every good. But the challenge is, how do we make that understood plainly by the millions of Australians who are not in this room? I'd like to suggest to you it's discipline, it's perseverance, and it is unity. We need to have the discipline to stick to the message. You need to have the perseverance to persist even when you think no one is listening. And you need to stick together as a movement. Never let the day-to-day tensions or disagreements distract you from the ultimate goal. Unity behind a common set of claims and remembering that the cause is one which you're all fighting for. And perseverance is crucial. I believe the door to great change is ajar. There is a crack in the door, it is opening. But it will need more pushing by more people to open it fully to achieve the goals which bring you here today. I believe that perseverance in the cause of change is necessary until it is no longer a question of if there will be a national disability insurance scheme, but when there will be a national disability insurance scheme. Now, my current job is all about facts and figures, although fortunately the Productivity Commission reports to me. And I'm not going to read you a laundry list of statistics about disability and disadvantage in Australia. You know them better. You could each, all 1,000 of you should be up here and I should be in the audience listening to you. You know the stories and you know where the projections are heading. No change is not an option because the cost of disability increases each year no matter what we do or don't do. Not talking about the problem does not make the problem any less real. But there are some observations worth making yet again. There are enough Australians with a severe or profound disability to populate an Australian city the size of Adelaide. There are enough Australians caring for someone with a disability to help populate a state the size of Tasmania. These Australians are amongst the poorest of our citizens, and the poverty rates of people with disability keep climbing. The long boom of the last 20 years cruelly bypassed people with disability and their carers. I have no idea how carers and people with disability pay their utility bills every quarter. I have no idea how they can make payments on debts. I have no idea how they can cope with some of the needs of shopping, and I can only imagine the products that people do not buy in the aisles of the Australian supermarkets because they are simply too expensive. And I can only begin to imagine how heartbreaking it is to go home to your kids not being able to deliver them the little treats which you just so desperately are DNA hardwired to give them. That over 30 in every 100 households of a person with disability live on half of the median income is a disgrace. And they still have to pay the highest price for the basics. Economists have measured that the impact of disability amounts to around 1/3 of household income. In other words, having a disability, having an impairment, makes and keeps one poor more often than not. And in 2011, in this year, what does it mean to have an intellectual disability or a serious episodic mental illness or a mobility impairment? Practically speaking, it means that you are less likely to finish secondary school, you are less likely to enjoy the opportunity of tertiary education or TAFE. You are more likely to be unemployed, you are more likely to have lower income, you are more likely to be in public housing, in fact, you're more likely to be in jail. If we were to ring-fence the great cities of Australia, the great suburbs of Australia, populations in their millions, and tell every parent in these new ghettos that we created that their child was likely to have a worse life outcome in each of those categories, there would be outrage. There would be upheaval. Now, I keep saying that Australia is a great country. We've been the land of the long economic miracle, perhaps since the time of Hawke and Keating and opening the economy right through to the minerals boom. How is it then that we can live with such inequity in our streets and our postcodes. And I don't think we can. I do believe that with discipline, perseverance and unity, we can work together to change this. A couple of years ago, on a visit to Western Australia, I discussed with a disability advocacy group the idea that in politics there's no reward for bad news. The premium or the reward is on good news, the announcements, the policy, the press releases, the positive stories for the daily news diet. That's why I think there was a collective sigh of relief within the disabilities movement, and to be honest myself, when the Productivity Commission handed down its draft report back in February. Now, I don't think that's the end of the story, and there's plenty of numbers to be crunched, plenty of analysis and response to be engaged in. But a test was passed in February. There was an economic idea about the reform of disability which would see individuals prioritised, and it was possible to do. It financially floated. Now, of course, it came with a big tag, and those numbers have to be crafted and moulded. But the point is, people said that economically we could do something which was fundamental to the civil rights of people with disability and their carers. Now, the fight is far from won. If we're to move to the positive, taking nothing away from the bad news which should be reported in disability, we still have to, in fact, promote the bad news. There is that morale-destroyingly awful, heartbreaking, spirit-sapping, depressing stories of struggle which individuals do every day in the privacy of their own homes. Indeed, the Shutout report, which the government released in August of 2009, 39 in every 100 submissions specifically mentioned discrimination and violation of rights of people with disability. To quote Shutout, it said, "Virtually every Australian with a disability encounters human rights violations at some point in their lives, and very many experience it every day of their life." And as the report shrewdly noted, governments rely on most parents never being able to bring themselves to abandon their children. Deep parental love and a sense of duty are being heavily exploited in order to save money, which in a country as wealthy as Australia is profoundly shocking. But even the most devoted and self-sacrificing of parents can't keep on caring if they're dead. That's what the Prime Minister and I are talking about when we say the status quo isn't acceptable. Listen, I'm here to open your conference as you plan your tactics and you advance the case. But let me say that the system needs to stop banking on the desperate goodwill of loving parents and families and underpaid carers and start lending a hand. I will say that you have a friend and an advocate about disability with me in the Parliament. You will have a strong voice around any ministerial table while Labor is in government. And I do see, as Assistant Treasurer, that your cause is one which is central to the future prosperity of our nation. You are not just seeking social justice, you are seeking economic justice, not to mention the productivity and sustainability of our nation. This nation can't be a worse nation for treating people with disability better. It's about empowerment. It's no secret that Labor has many challenges. Making big reforms, stimulating growth and building jobs, smoothing the effects of the mining economy across all parts of Australia. This is an economy in transition, and Labor should be good at managing the changing of our economy. But Labor also has to be good at managing social justice and promoting social justice. Labor has to be good at caring for and empowering people. We have to proceed with this debate on disability because that is what a Labor government should do. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come back and reconnect with you. I understand very well that you will not be denied in your pursuit of the truth. I understand that you will not be deterred, deferred, or distracted from your pursuit of the truth. I understand this truth, that people with disability in this country do not get a square deal. To, again, like Bruce, borrow from the Reverend Martin Luther King and apply his comments in this context of this forum at this time. This nation has written a cheque, has issued a promissory note for people with disability and their carers for a very long time. It is now time that in a nation as wealthy and as clever and as generous as Australia, it is time that that cheque is honoured. Have a great conference.